Welcome to Living Not So Fabulously, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on money stories from your favorite activists and allies, artists and tech gurus, and trailblazing leaders in the LGBTQ+ community. We are David
and John Ottenschneider,
your financial coaches and hosts.
Having experienced firsthand what it's like coming back from debt, we want to help you avoid our mistakes to build the life that you want.
So we all can live just a little bit more fabulously.
And now for the show. Love and marriage, love
No. Is this your not so creative way of sharing that our guests today are married with children?
I thought it was creative.
Welcome back to Living Not So Fabulously. Today's guests, Eric Berger and Dan Amboyer, are married with children, but you only know one of them from television.
You might remember Dan from shows like Younger, Blacklist, Redemption, and he also played opposite Neil Patrick Harris in Uncoupled. He also played His Royal Highness Prince William in William and Catherine, A Royal Romance.
Something that you absolutely love.
While his husband Eric is the Senior Vice President of Wealth Management at UBS.
And one of the things that I absolutely love about the first part of our interview with Dan and Eric is this idea that the two of them had a conversation around the emotional and the financial impact of what would happen if Dan came out in the entertainment industry.
Because he was playing these heartthrob roles, right?
Exactly.
He was the leading man.
And for that reason, people like his agent, PR folks, and others were concerned that he might lose out on roles like that, reducing his ability to earn income in the industry. Yeah. That kind of reminds me a little bit of my own story about coming out and the things that you can do when you do have stability financially. I mentioned previously that I was raised in a very religious household that didn't encourage me to go to college and have a career and make good money. And for that reason, I didn't feel like I was able to come out. It wasn't until I actually got a job and had stable finances that I was able to come out to my family, because I knew that I would lose them, and actually I was disowned by my family.
So let's hear how Dan created a bit of financial security in tandem with Eric and made it a little bit easier for him to come out in the entertainment industry.
Dan and Eric, welcome to Living Not So Fabulously.
Hey,
thank you for having us. Super excited to have you both. So Dan, first I want to start off with this question for you, this idea that you came out back in 2017, and you are an actor and out in the world of entertainment. And although there are other actors who have come out previous to you, it's still a unique situation for every single person, right? Yeah. So when you look back on that situation, what were kind of things that were going on, feelings that you were having, thoughts that you were having, ways that it affected you, you as a couple, and your income?
I think it really was a couple's conversation at that point, because Eric and I have been together in this good year of our Lord 2024 for 16 plus years, 16 and a half years. So we've been together for a long time, and I kind of, we kind of birthed my career together in a way. And so he's been around for the whole ride. And I think when I first came to New York, you have meetings with agents, with managers, with people in the business. And I felt very under pressure to keep up the appearance of being very straight. And I was told, the roles that I would be playing were, people would look at me and say, oh, you're kind of like a leading man, and so you have to be straight. And so I wouldn't even let people know when I was doing, a TV show or working. They wouldn't even know that I was gay. And so the show that I was doing at the time that I came out was called Younger, and it was created and written by one of the favorite people I've ever worked with, Darren Star, who also did like Sex and the City, and but even he's gay, and so many of the writers are gay, and a lot of people on the set were gay, but even then, I didn't feel comfortable to say I am too for the whole first season. So it was so funny because while we were shooting promo for the second season, I was in a trailer with one of the other actors who also came out to me. At that time, we were like, oh, you are too? Oh, me too. And it was such a weird thing, but I feel like that was a little bit a look into the time period, that even back then, a few years ago, how much we've changed. But I was very, very stressed about it all. And it was a conversation with my agent and manager, and there was kind of some a lot of pushback, I would say. Even casting directors, people saying you shouldn't do this because it will hurt you, but if it's best for you, then do it.
Right.
And someone connected me with, at the time, Zach Quinto had came out at that time, and someone was a good friend, and he actually went to the same school I went to. So he was very gracious, and we had a conversation then, and he kind of helped, guide me in a way and say, this is kind of the best way to prepare for this and to do it. And Eric, I felt like we should do it too, because, when you're joining as a family and you're saying, I want to marry this person and be official, it was so weird. I mean, you can speak to this too, but it was so strange to be on a red carpet and him to have to kind of like slink in the background. You know what I mean?
The 10 paces behind that Philip has to be behind.
The shadows slinking, and then like all of a sudden you join together again, and honestly, you still can see that today if you're there. But so yeah, it was a conversation, and it was like, you may take a hit career-wise to do that, but it felt like the right thing to do. And I appreciate all the other actors and people who have paved the way to make it possible for me to do that.
Did you feel like the two of you needed to prepare financially for I will say, I'm going to take a step back. The idea of you talking to directors, casting, all these different people.
Yeah.
The vast majority of us don't go to our boss and say, do you think it's okay for my career if I come out?
Yeah.
Right? It's either we do or we don't.
Right. Well,
we have those kind of internal dialogues. But what about you as a couple financially?
I think we were fortunate in that I had come out professionally. I was really part of my pitch to my first firm when I started on Wall Street. It was, I want to be a financial planner to same-sex couples. So I was out professionally and personally. I definitely respected the difference in pace that Dan needed to do as an entertainer. Right. It's a different, more broad-based audience, if you will, than what I was doing. But we were fortunate in that my career and income were consistent and stable in the fact of being out, and that was okay. And as we all know about actors and entertainers, there's a lot of variability with income anyway. So we had lived through that truth for years prior to him coming out. So we were prepared to, for whatever came in terms of pauses or so forth.
That was a challenging thing to prepare though for, because knowing, all those kind of warnings that people put out there, like, at the time I was playing, leading men for, like, I do the Lifetime movies and the Hallmark movies and all that stuff, and you're the lead. Yeah, but you're the straight guy, and there's a certain audience that those companies are trying to appeal for.
Right.
And they're saying if you have someone who's so publicly out, it was fun. We did it big. I mean, we came out like, our Wedding People magazine, that kind of thing. So, when it's so publicly like that, they're saying, can you also then play the straight guy in this? And so me just knowing, okay, I'm not going to have necessarily all those same types of roles, and that is going to be a financial hit,
right?
And being okay with that, so we did kind of prepare in that way.
What do you think you would have been able to come out, considering your finances, had you not been in a relationship with somebody that you could lean on?
I mean, that's a good question. I think I've been very fortunate that, as you said, we've built a life together for the past 16 years, and I didn't feel that pressure to in that way. But I think if I were single, that is probably something actors are struggling with now.
Yeah.
To think about, is that financially in my best interest to do so? Because I think we have come really far now, as we see, in these past several years. But yeah, I think people have to think about that probably, which is hard.
Right.
So at that time, you must have had, at the very least, start to have the financial conversation at that point in your relationship. Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we're often asked from our listeners and viewers is, how do you get on the same page with your partner with your finances? So can you answer that question? Like, how did you two get on your same page financially?
I think it's different for everyone, just having been a financial planner for a while and then thinking about how we did it within our relationship. I think we started with common goals and values. There's definitely a trust factor there. Mm-hmm. Wearing my day job hat, there's also, some cautionary tales, right? You have to be careful in combining accounts. You can have ownership issues, potential tax ramifications. Luckily we were knowledgeable of those, but we began just gradually and sharing bills. Most couples don't have exactly the same incomes. Mm-hmm. So that's where the trust factor comes in, where, you put it on the chalkboard and these are our goals and this is what our budget is. And I think that longer term goal orientation is probably the tougher conversation than, say, the day-to-day logistics of, what account are we paying rent from, or who's going to pay the electric bill this month, et cetera.
Yeah.
In a sense, and it's probably not a very financial planner answer, it kind of works itself out.
So one would assume that you're probably the CFO of your household. Does that make sense?
Well, let's not make
Happy.
assumptions.
I was going to
happy
say
to-
finance and flair, right?
Yeah, right. Well, okay, I'll take that.
Currently, but I'm happy to resign.
But one thing I thought was I've always kind of said about Eric, because when actor friends ask like, "Oh, what is your spouse do?" and that kind of thing, I say he's a financial planner, and I kind of draw a little bit of a parallel. Like he's a little bit of a hunter gatherer in a way too, So when we first met, he was
I had to start my own business.
yeah, well, he was in school, but he had I think 2 years or something where he was salaried. But then after that, it was jumping off the cliff.
Right.
And so at the same time, it's commission, and I'm working, for trying to find the next job and find the way in. So we both kind of had this parallel, coming up into New York, kind of struggle too,
Right.
Or not struggle. We did.
Well, it was
but
a struggle. Hey, I mean, as Sinatra says, if you can make it here.
we earned our New York
Yeah.
grant, in that way together,
Yeah.
which was satisfying and a parallel as an actor and banker.
I appreciate him
Big
saying
one.
that. That is true. I mean, so we had to build a client base, or obviously I charge commission and fees. A lot of our clients are, full planning type relationships, but that took a minute to build. And so there was a point in our relationship where both of us were, fledgling and trying to build our brands.
It was challenging to plan, there for a while.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
We definitely did not always know the trajectory of the income growth or decline.
So how did you get through those times? What was what tools, resources, therapy, whatever helped you get through that?
Yes.
Mom and dad.
No.
Tap the bank of mom and dad.
Yeah, there was no support from, any kind of guardian angel in that way. It was day by day. I think you can plan facets of it. For example, model conservatively, think, don't go above your means.
We definitely budgeted.
We definitely
out a lot,
budgeted a lot. And I think it also made us hungry in a way as well to
I would be
be
calling-
successful. And
Calling SAG and be like, when's this residual check coming? Like, I know it's owed to me. Where is it? Where's my foreign residuals? And that kind of thing. And but we
Watching
would
the bank
seriously
account.
account for that though, and then plan out. Okay, this is going to pay for rent for this month, and that's we did do that.
so we were fortunate in that, we worked hard, we put in the time, we saw a general trajectory toward growth, and we had hope.
And he managed to pay off his debt too from school, which I was very
Nice.
proud of.
Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every dollar of that.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing. So that was the first part of our interview with Dan and Eric. We absolutely love that, especially this conversation about how they became a team and working together. Even though that they came to New York separately, they realized that working together on their finances could help propel them much faster.
Exactly. They're a great real-life example of the benefits of talking about finances with your partner. And we know from studies that couples who talk about their finances report having better intimacy.
Oh, and on that note, we'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back. We have more of our interview with Dan and Eric to share with you. What I love about the second part, though, is that they share some great wisdom that applies to queer families, but really it applies to all families.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love is they talk about how they're setting their kids up financially. And one of the things that they talk about reminds me of something that I did when in a previous relationship, we had a son together. So when my stepson was born, I set up a UTMA account. That's a Uniform Transfer to Minors account that allows gifts given to him to be invested in the stock market. You see, minors in the United States cannot invest in the stock market. So we were able to set that up for him. An investment of roughly about $3,000 over a number of years has now grown to tens of thousands of dollars, which he has been able to spend on things like new computers for school, an iPad, even a post-graduation trip. It really did set him up with some financial capabilities that he wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, and he actually got to a point where he said we gave him the best gifts of anybody he knows.
Right. And this does key off of a great point that Eric makes in this conversation.
Exactly. So let's hear Eric and Dan share their story.
One of the things I appreciated that you said, and I think you even mentioned a chalkboard, putting the goals on the chalkboard, right? And having something to work towards. You also had a goal towards being parents, right?
Yes.
And
Was that on the chalkboard?
yeah,
Well, I think it's fair to say that Dan would, at certain points, ask me to put it was actually like on a yellow legal pad. He would ask me to put
Always
it
a yellow
away.
legal
He would
pad.
ask me to put it away. But then he was much more apt to talk about the family planning. And that conversation sparked really early on in our relationship. We always talked about the desire to have children. Getting to a point where we could do it was not, we weren't able to foresee that in our early days. We were hopeful. It was all hope-based. And then I think it was probably, it was a couple of years before we had our first child where we said, hey, this is feasible. We can actually do it. Started having the conversations.
A lot of research.
A lot of research. It took us years in planning. Both.
Where did you research? Where'd you go? What books?
We were lucky to have some friends that had gone through it. We were pretty focused on the surrogacy process and wanting to do surrogacy from day one. So we had a couple of very good friends that walked us through the steps, all the different stakeholders, you
Many
engaged.
steps.
right.
And luckily actually set us up with their egg donor agent. That was really our first, I think, connection.
It's a big financial burden to do all at once, but doing that one at a time was definitely the way to go for us.
And it's not just the financial burden, but the range of the financial burden, right? Because it's quite a delta that, the budget that one gives, is right in, if you kind of aim for right in the middle, but you can have an oops side to that where it can go considerably higher. So you have to be prepared for that when you start surrogacy.
So what would you suggest to folks to prepare for that delta?
I think you have the conversations with the stakeholders, the clinics, the agents. Ask around. Luckily, there are enough same-sex couples that have gone through it at this point who can point you in the right direction. I think that there's a lot of distillation of information you have to do because there's a lot of different info. There's people have different views on it, and there's a lot of different ways to approach it, believe it or not. So conversations, distill that information down, and I would say be conservative as you think through it in terms of what you will actually have to spend.
And plan to save more than you think you need.
If you're going to have a kid, add an extra 10 or 20%, right? It's going to end up costing you more.
Yeah.
Are you using any tools right now with your kids when it comes to money? Is
The piggy bank?
financial is right? Is
We're
that a
teaching
thing?
him. Basically. I mean, he's definitely.
They both
started,
have 529s. We were, just given my day job, that was an early goal establishment that we made in combination. They do have piggy banks. We also, at least for our older child, we've tried to instill some savings value, and he gets gift cards from relatives and neighbors, and he judiciously uses them on
ferrets
books.
them away, and we'll use them.
Yes, he knows exactly where they are.
Yeah.
So we're starting with these types of principles with the educational aspect. But college funding, as we all know, is no joke.
Right.
And so I recommend starting it as early as you get a Social Security number.
Yep.
Most of the time, you should get the Social Security number fairly early. You can start the college savings plans, and 529s are the preferable ones typically.
You bring up a good point, though, right? With the escalating costs of college and then everything else regarding inflation, becoming harder and harder to manage raising a child and then also preparing for your future goals, right? You're going to want to be able to retire at some point and hopefully have a comfortable retirement. How are you balancing the cost of having a kid with what your long-term goals are going to be?
Well, I think that's why time is so important, power of compounding, right? So to think about the inflation rate of college today, arguably it's unsustainable, right? You look at how much it costs for, even a public institution, 4 years in the United States. And then you couple that with, okay, we need to sock away enough in our, respective retirement plans to be able to afford life after X age. It's problematic. I think you have to be more aggressive with what you sock away today because of that inflation factor in the long term.
Yeah.
So stay within your means, keep your fixed overhead right at a reasonable level.
So what tools, you mentioned Excel, Or is that the tool that you're primarily using to manage the budget? Because people often ask us what our favorite tool is, and we always kind of go back to Excel, despite all the apps. And
Our budget is in Excel.
tools.
Well, yeah. So I mean, Excel is usually easily accessible to most. I would say, not to plug any particular ones, but I also like Rocket Money. I find that, especially, you've got two sides of it, the inflows and the outflows, and you have to monitor both. And having been a planner for years for various types of people, sometimes those of us who are kind of the Excel captains don't have it down to the T as much as you would think, right?
Right.
You've got macro thinkers and micro thinkers, but sometimes you have to go in and say, oh, wow, I didn't know we've been paying X amount on, this subscription that neither of us use.
Yeah.
Now that we have, no more cable packages, I'm sure we'll go back to that eventually.
I think this has been wonderful. One more question I have for you as we close out. If you could look back at yourself 16 years ago, what financial advice would you give yourself then that you could benefit from now?
Oh, you should kick that one off.
Me.
16 years ago.
Invest in Beanie Babies.
Invest
Invest in Beanie Babies and crypto. I'll put it all in crypto.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I would. He would not do that.
No, don't listen to actors on that. Yeah, no.
I think that perhaps it would have been, it's hard to go backward and, then say, well, if I knew now what I didn't, if I knew then what I know now, I would say that it's going to be okay, I think is the first thing. And I think that if you work hard and you realize that some of the things that are super important to you 16 years ago are going to be less important to you, that is probably the message I would give to a lot of young same-sex couples starting out, is to really say, okay, right now I care about X. What am I going to care about in 15, 20 years? Will it be the same pattern? And if not, then you got to adjust it accordingly. I think we plan for a lot of other things in our lives, but not per se what the financial profile looks like.
Yeah. I appreciate that you say that. This idea, I think we need this idea of short-term goals can help motivate us in the here and now, but long-term goals can give us perspective as to what's important in the here and now as well, right? Or else we do consume just in the here and now and we don't have anything for later. So appreciate your comments there.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, my financial planner.
So that concludes our interview with Dan and Eric. Absolutely love that interview.
Great interview.
Yes,
Yeah.
Clearly they are a team. I think that one of the things that really points out to us is that in the queer community, there are a variety of relationships. And because of that, we have faced not only social, but also economic and legal barriers to our relationships. And it really highlights this need to be a team in your relationship.
Yeah, and clearly Dan and Eric have had a lot of conversations, and I
Right.
think that's the foundation of their entire relationship.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to have better, deeper conversations with your partner. Some conversation starters you might want to consider are, what goals do we have and what financial steps do we need to take to get there? Another thing you might want to ask yourself is, what are other couples in our circle of influence that are positive influences on us that we might want to hang out with more? And also maybe, how can we be better leaders in the community? These are just some conversation starters to maybe ask yourself, but of course there are others. So with that, thank you for joining us for another episode. Until next time,
Stay fabulous.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.